Hello and welcome to another Fluid Review training tutorial. This tutorial is going to cover how to deal and manage with basic questions in a form task. Now, to start, you're going to want to go to your Workflow Designer, and that's just in the Edit Your Site tab and under the Workflow option, Workflow Designer. Previously, I've added in this test form here, and I'm going to go into the form itself by clicking on the Form section where it says Rename Test Form. This is going to bring me into the form builder. Now on the left hand side is the main toolbar for building your form, and you'll see we start with a question bank. Now there's two parts to it. The first is basic questions and the second is advanced. This tutorial is going to cover some of the key basic type questions. Now to add a question into the form, there's three ways you can do that. One is to simply click and drag. The second is to select and press add question. And the third is to double click. Now you'll see I have three questions that have been added in. If you wish to start updating and editing a specific question, over in the form area here, you can click on that question. And you'll see by clicking on this question, I've now selected the options tab over here for that specific question. The first two things you're always going to want to do with any question you add in is set the title or the description. Now for the title, I'm going to click to open my visual editor. And in this case, the type of question I'm dealing with is a section heading. And you'll see that highlighted over here where it says type section heading. So this is just meant to be able to help you name pages if you want to label them into sections. And I'm just going to call this general information. And I'm going to make it stand out a little bit more by making it a little bit bigger, and I might even change the color to be a nice blue. And you'll see that take effect. Now if you want to add some descriptions in, you're more than welcome as well. And again, a visual editor is there for you for this section too. Now I'm going to flip into question 2. And this here, you'll see now the type is highlighted as a text response. And in this case, I'm going to retitle it to say first name. Now for every question, there are display options and options. When I click to open display, you'll see the very first option available for text responses is that you can make them multi-line. So here you can change your rows and columns to change how big you want that box to appear. The maximum you can do is 100 by 25. The next option below this is that you can make it appear or display side by side. And this is in case you want to have two questions beside each other on the form instead of just one question taking up the whole width. Below that is append to previous question, and what that does is it removes any gap between the two questions here to make it look like they're one. So this little gray space in between, when you preview it, will no longer exist. Now finally, there is the options tab, and for every text question, there are a few things you can do. The first thing to note is that for every question, they are by default added in as optional. So if you do want to mark them as required, simply uncheck the optional button, and now it will be required to be completed. Now for text, you do have the ability to hide the input, and if you check this off, it's going to add little stars in as an applicant's typing instead of showing the real text behind it. This is so that if an applicant was in a public space and putting in, let's say, their social security number, you might not want that to really be overly visible. So hiding the input will simply hide the input to the applicant as they're typing it and give them little stars instead. Now below that is validation, and this is where you can set a validation on the text that's being completed. A very common one is emails, so you want to make sure that it is a valid email, and you can check off to verify the domain too to make sure it's a real email domain, so at Gmail or something like that. Another extremely common option is word limits, so it's actually just at the very bottom of the page, and you just can't quite see it on mine. And once you select word limits, you do get the ability to set a length. So in here, I can say now I want it to be between 100 and 200 words. And please, I do encourage you to play around and see some of the other options that are available. We do have a lot of the key ones included, including your phone numbers, zip codes, postal codes, integers, letters, and even dollars. Now, the final option here is initial value. And this is if you just want to type something small in here. I'm just going to say max 500 words. Now where the initial value appears as the initial little bit of text for that question itself. Now, whenever you're making changes, remember to press save because that will save what you've done. Now, in the top, there is a preview this page, and if I click this, I will now get to preview the work that I've done. And you'll see here now that initial value is placed in there. And you'll also see my validation in place where you can see now the minimum number I've entered, or you'll see the number I've entered. You'll see the minimum of 100 and the maximum of 2. And as I carry on and type, you will see that the count below will increase. So it's just a nice feature to let your applicants know how many words they've actually written. Now I'm going to move on to the next question type that I've added in, and I'm just going to click here, and you'll see now I've selected a multiple choice type question. And in this case, I'm going to select age. Now, for multiple choice, you'll see that under choices, I have choice 1, choice 2, and you'll see them appear here. So one option you have is to simply click in the box, and you can start by saying 0 to 15. I can click in box 2, say 15 to 20, and I can use the add button below to continue adding in more choices. Now that's a little more time consuming. So another option you have is to use the bulk button beside it, and when you click on the bulk button, it will open up a bulk editor. Now here there's two things you can do. One is to know that each new line of text is a new line itself. So if I now press OK, you'll see I have a bunch of options in there. Now I'm going to go back in, and another thing to know about the bulk editor is that we do have some pre-saved lists. So based off of common options selected, such as states and countries, days and months, we have them available. And you'll see the very first one in my list is age. So I'm going to select that instead of having to manually input every option. And these look accurate for what I'm looking for. And once you press OK, you'll see the choices are all updated. Now, the Add Other choice exists for multiple choice and checkbox questions. And what it does is it allows you to add an automatic Add Other Please Specify. So you'll see there's a text box beside it. For every multiple choice and checkbox question, if you did want to add a text box beside a selected option, you can simply click where that choice is, and you'll see the first option is Add Text Response. So by checking that off, you'll see that's now added. And we do also give you the ability to set a validation on that text should you need it. Now the other option that you have for each choice you'll see here is static choice. And what that does is it will make this be static in the list. So under our options, one thing we can do is randomize and alphabetize the choices. And if you choose one of those options, but for instance you want other to stay at the very bottom of the list permanently, you can check it off to make it a static choice. So static just means it's going to stay where it is in this line. Now note if you check off alphabetize or randomize, they are only going to appear alphabetized or randomized when you preview the list. It's not going to automatically update the order here. So just keep that in mind. Now, the final thing with our text responses being added to multiple choice is you can also make them mandatory by checking off Make Static Choice Mandatory. Now, under display, there are a few different options that you'll always have with single select questions. Number one is being the appearance, so you can change it to be horizontal, where they'll go across instead of down. You can make it a star rating, so it'll give stars instead of giving actual information, so it just gives you stars based on the number here. You can change it to be a slide bar, so they can just click and drag. And finally, you can also make it a combo box, where it's just a box for selection instead. Now I'm going to go back to the default. Also within this, if you did have a multiple choice list of, let's say, states where you're up in, relatively large numbers, you might want to make it multiple columns. So the column option here will allow you to choose multiple columns to appear. And of course, you have the display side by side and append. So now I'm just going to save this and briefly preview it to show you now where the two columns will appear. So you'll see that I selected to show as two columns. In the form it didn't, but when I previewed it, I can see both. So again, just keep in mind some of the settings you will have to preview to actually see take effect. The next basic type of question in here is our drop-down question. So I'm just going to double click and add one in. And you'll see it's very similar to our multiple choice. So you can set a question title, a description, and then here we have our choices, and now they're just appearing in a drop-down list instead of a multiple choice. So here I'm just going to update this to say state. I'm going to press bulk, and I'm going to actually choose the US state option. Now for choices, if you do want to minimize them because there are a lot, you can click where it says choices and it will collapse them for you. So now you can access your display options and options. And again, because it's a drop-down list, you're not as much changing around the look and feel because it's already in a drop-down, but you do have the display side-by-side, append, and your randomized choices as well. Now, one difference, because it is a selection, you can set the initial value, so what's appearing here, to automatically appear as one of the choices. So now that I've selected Alabama, you'll see that appears as the first, and that's just if you prefer to do that instead of the initial value of the 2 slashes. Now, the next type is a checkbox. And the big difference here with checkbox versus any of the other 2 above is that our checkbox questions are multi-select questions. So I'm going to select and say favorite ice cream flavor. So now I'm going to change this, and I'm just going to say lemon, vanilla, chocolate. I'm just going to press OK. Actually, I'm going to say select your 2 favorite ice cream flavors. And of course, you can have a larger list. The idea here now is that my users have a question that they can select multiple for. And under our display and our options, you'll see there's 1 or 2 different things. Similar to multiple choice, you can change the appearance. Now here you're limited to a horizontal or combo box. You can change the column option, so again, make multiple columns. And where things get really different from a multiple choice is you now have the option to restrict the number of selected as well as show the number of selected options. So since I said I only want them to select their 2 favorite ice cream flavors, I'm going to limit this to be options between 1 and 2 choices. And now I'm just going to press save. And now when I preview this, you will see that I have my number being counted here because I asked them to count it. And you'll see the minimum and maximum numbers listed. And as I update it, it will show for me. So that's the basics between those handful of questions there. Now I'm just going to pass back to our question bank. And I'm going to briefly show you these grid questions. So these grid questions are fairly straightforward. What it does is it creates a grid for multiple choice, a grid for checkbox, and a grid for text questions as well. Now I'm just going to click and drag in a multiple choice grid. And what you'll see here now is that I'm creating, as I said, a grid instead of one individual question. So this is commonly used for rating questions. Rate your performance on a scale of 1 to 5. And now you'll see there's choices as well as variables. Anytime you see variables in our site, it means that these are individual questions. So in our case, I'm asking multiple questions that are all using the same scale, so I'm creating it in a grid instead. So I'm just going to change this to say, rate your skill, your tempo, length, overall. Okay, so now I can add in separate individual questions here. And then under my choices, I'm going to click on my bulk option. And now I want them to score themselves on a score of 4 and 5. So the choices be the multiple choice options that can be selected, and the variables are actually end up being their own individual questions within this larger one. Now under display options, you will have some different ones, such as setting this individual column size. Again, you can display by side, append. One key difference when you are using grid is that you can show borders and alternate backgrounds, just to make it a little cleaner. And then you have options where, again, you can randomize. And more importantly, if you are using ranking ones, you can do force unique. So this is where if you want someone to rate their favorite things and you want them to place them in order from 1 to 5, if you force unique, it means I won't be able to select one for every single one. So I'm actually just going to check this off just to demonstrate. So now when I click preview, you're going to see a grid, and I've alternated backgrounds, so you'll see that happening. And if I try to select 2 on multiple of these, you'll see it won't let me. That's because I've told the system they have to be unique, and here now it will. Now, the other grid type questions are all fairly similar in terms of checkbox grids or multiple choice. So you'll see if I add a checkbox in, it's the same basic layout that you have up here. The one that's slightly different is a text response, and that's solely because it just lists variables and then text spaces here. And again, for each you get the options to make them multi-line. So that now covers the basics of the basic question bank in our forms.